This is Victor Marromo, your strategic planning and performance management coach and consultant. Since the year 2017, I've been in the learning, development, and consulting world when I attended a reflections conference by coaching ourselves, and I'm specialized in strategic management. Today, I want to introduce the SP&PM newsletter, where we will be discussing selected managerial topics such as strategy, performance, change management, learning and development, peer forums, and so much more interesting topics. Please feel free to comment, discuss, and to propose new themes in the management world for the newsletter. I will be glad to hear from you soon. See you in the newsletter. This was Victor Marrom, your strategic planning and performance management coach. I will be glad to help you in your managerial endeavors.
Hello, manager. This is your strategic planning and performance management coach, Victor Marrom. Welcome to your weekly newsletter. Today, continuing with the topic of change management, I want to talk a little bit about the five mind of a manager or the five mindsets of a manager. This topic was first introduced by Jonathan Gosling and Henry Mintzberg. The chief executive of a major Canadian company complained recently that he can get his engineers to think like managers. It's a common complaint, but behind it lies an uncommonly important question. What does it mean to think like a manager? Sadly, little attention has been paid to that question in recent years. Most of us have become so in love with the concept of leadership that management has been pushed into the background. Nobody aspires to being a good manager anymore. Everybody wants to be a great leader, but the separation of management from leadership is quite dangerous. Just as management without leadership encourages an uninspired style, which deadens activities, leadership without management encourages a disconnected style, which promotes gaps, hubris, lack of critical thinking. And we all know the destructive power of lack of critical thinking and silos in our organizations and business units. So let's get back to plain old management, the one who was taught in the good schools of management. The problem, of course, is that plain old management is very complicated and quite confusing. Be global, managers are told, and be local. Collaborate and compete. Change perpetually and maintain order. Make the numbers while nurturing your people. How is anyone supposed to reconcile all these efforts? The fact is, no one can. To be effective, managers need to face the juxtapositions in order to arrive at a deep integration of these seemingly contradictory concerns. That means they must focus not only on what they have to accomplish, but also on how they have to think. Managers need various mindsets. Helping managers appreciate that was the challenge we set for ourselves. When I began to develop a new program for practicing managers, which is the base of coaching ourselves, We knew we could not rely on the usual structure of some traditional education, which divides the management into the discrete business functions of marketing, finance, accounting, and so on. Our intention was to really educate managers who were coming out of these narrow silos. Why push them back in? We need a new structure that encouraged synthesis rather than separation. And this is a critical aspect in critical thinking. Synthesis. Write it down. This is a keyword. Please write it in the keyword section in your notes. What we came up with a structure based on the 5 aspects of the managerial mind has proved not only powerful in the classroom but insightful in practice, as we hope to demonstrate in this newsletter. We'll explain how we came up with the 5 managerial mindsets. Then we'll discuss each in some depth before concluding with the case for interweaving the 5, which will be your assignment at the end of the newsletter. So, said this, let's begin. The 5 managerial mindsets. The International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, headquartered in Geneva, has a management development concern. It worries that it may be drifting too far toward a fast action culture. It knows that it must act quickly in responding to disasters everywhere, earthquakes and wars, floods and famines, which are present in our everyday lives, but also sees the need to engage in the slower, more delicate task of building a capacity for action that is careful, thoughtful, and tailored to local conditions and needs. Many organizations, as these, face a similar problem. They know how to execute, but they are not so adept at stepping back to reflect on their situations. And this is one objective of the newsletter. Let's step back and reflect on our own managerial situations. That is key word number 2, reflection. Write it down in your notes section. Others face the opposite predicament. They get so mired in thinking about their problems that they can get things done fast. We all know bureaucracies that are great at planning and organizing, but very slow to respond to market forces, just as we're all acquainted with the nimble companies that react to every stimulus, but slowly and have to be constantly fixing things. And then, of course, there are those that suffer from both afflictions. For example, firms whose marketing departments are absorbed with grand positioning statements, while their sales forces chase every possible deal. And this is a very important topic. It relies on the aspects of change management and sales management. Those two aspects establish the bounds of management. Everything that every effective manager does is sandwiched between action on the ground and reflection in the abstract. Action without reflection is thoughtless. Reflection without action is passive. Every manager has to find a way to combine these two mindsets to function at the point where reflective thinking meets practical doing. But action and reflection about what? One obvious answer is about collaboration, about getting things done cooperatively with other people in negotiations, for example, where a manager cannot act alone. Another answer is that action, reflection, and collaboration have to be rooted in a deep appreciation of reality in all its facets. We call this mind worldly, which the Oxford English Dictionary defines as experiencing life, sophisticated, practical. It's important that some words you try to look them out in the dictionary in order for you to understand them. This is our keyword number 3, worldly. Please write it down in your notes section. Finally, action, reflection, and collaboration, as well as worldliness, must subscribe to a certain rationality or logic that rely on an analytic mindset too. We have sets of the managerial mind, sets in which managers interpret and deal with the world around them. Each has a dominant subject, or target, or objective of its own. For reflection, the objective is the self. There can be no insight without self-knowledge. Collaboration takes the subject beyond the self, into the manager's network of relationships. Analysis goes a step beyond that, to the organization. Organizations depend on the systematic decomposition of activities, and that's what analysis is all about. Remember, as managers and coaches, we analyze. Beyond the organization lies what we consider the subject of the worldly mindset, namely context, the worlds around the organization. Finally, the action mindset pulls everything together through the process of change management, in self, relationships, organization, and context. The practice of managing then involves 5 perspectives, which correspond to the 5 models that we will be talking in our newsletter. Managing self, the reflective mindset. Managing organizations, the analytic mindset. Managing context, the worldly mindset. Managing relationships, the collaborative mindset. Managing change, the change management and action mindset, which we discuss in our introduction in newsletter 1. If you are a manager, this is your world or will be your world. Let us make clear several characteristics of this set of sets. First, we make no claim that our framework is either scientific or comprehensive. It simply has proved useful in our work with managers, including in our coaching program. Second, we ask you to consider each of these managerial mindsets as an attitude, a frame of mind that opens new sights, new vistas. Unless you get into a reflective frame of mind, for example, you cannot open yourself to new ideas. And this is critical in our job as coaches or managers. We have to stop and be reflective so we can open ourselves to new ideas. You may not even notice such ideas in the first place without a worldly frame of mind. And of course, you cannot appreciate the buzz, the vistas, and the opportunities of actions unless you engage in them. Third, a word on our word mindsets. We do not use it to set any manager's mind. All of us have had more than enough of that. We are tired of that past thinking and behavior. Rather, we use the word in the spirit of a fortune. One of us happened to pull out of a Chinese cookie recently, as they give them in the restaurants. Get your mindset. Confidence will lead you on. We ask you to get your mindset around 5 key ideas. Then, not just confidence, but coherence can lead you on. Think, too, of these mindsets as mindsights, perspectives, but be aware that, improperly used, they can also be mindsights. Too much of any of them, obsessive, analyzing, compulsive, too much collaboration, for instance, and the mindset can blow up in your face. Said this, let's begin with the reflective mindset. Let's manage ourselves. Managers who are sent off to development courses or coaching courses these days often find themselves being welcomed to a type of bootcamps. This is no country club, they are warned. You'll have to work hard, but this is wrong-headed. While managers certainly don't need a country club atmosphere for development, neither do they need bootcamps. Most managers we know already live bootcamp every day. Besides, in real bootcamps, soldiers learn to march and obey, not to stop, think, reflect, write, develop essays, develop managerial skills, entrepreneurial skills. These days, what managers desperately need is to stop and think, to step back and reflect thoughtfully on their experiences. Indeed, in his famous book Rules for Radicals, Saul Alinsky makes the interesting point that events or happenings, our managerial or entrepreneurial happenings, become experience only after they have been reflected upon thoughtfully. Most people do not accumulate a body of experience. Most people go through life undergoing a series of happenings which pass through their systems undigested. Happenings become experiences when they are really digested, when they are reflected upon, related to general patterns, and synthesized. Remember our keywords? Synthesis. Unless the meaning is understood, managing is mindless. Hence, we take reflection to be that space suspended between experience and explanation, where the mind makes the connections. Imagine yourself in a meeting when someone suddenly erupts or starts a personal rant. You're tempted to ignore or dismiss this outburst. You heard after all that the person is having some problems at home or at his daily activities. But why not use it to reflect on your own reaction, whether embarrassment, anger, or frustration, and so recognize some comparable feelings in yourself? Your own reaction now becomes a learning experience for you. You have opened a space for imagination between your experience and your explanation. It can make all the difference. Organizations may not need mirror people who see in everything only reflections of their own behavior, but neither do they need window people who cannot see beyond the images in front of them. They need managers who see both ways. In a sense, one look out the window at dawn to see through their own reflections to the awakening world outside. Reflect, and this is another keyword, in Latin means to refold, which suggests that attention turns inward so that it can be turned outward. This means going beyond introspection. It means looking in so that you can better see out in order to perceive a familiar thing in a different way. A product as a service, maybe, or a customer as a partner. Does that not describe the thinking of the really successful managers? The Andy Groves of the world? Compare such people with the Messiers and Lays, who dazzle with great mergers and grand strategies before burning out their companies. So let's stop a little bit and reflect. These days, what managers desperately need is to stop and think, to step back and reflect thoughtfully on their experiences. So, I urge you to stop. Try to reflect on a recent managerial experience with a client, with a supplier, with your corporate, with your fellow employees. How did you react? Did you give in to the rant? Do you see yourself as a mirror or as a window? Likewise, reflective managers are able to see behind in order to look ahead. Successful visions are not immaculately conceived, they are painted, stroke by stroke, out of experiences of the past. Reflective managers, in other words, have a healthy respect for history. Not just the grand history of deals and disasters, but also the everyday history of all the little actions that make organizations work. Consider in this regard Kofi Annan's deep personal understanding of the United Nations, a comprehension that has been the source of his ability to help move that complex body of bureaucracy and people to a different and better place. You must appreciate the past if you wish to use the present to get to a better future. Said this, let's continue with managing organizations, the analytical mindset. The analytical mindset. Literally, analysis means to let loose, from the Greek ana, meaning up, and lying, meaning loosen. Analysis loosens up complex phenomena by breaking them into component parts. By decomposing them, analysis happens everywhere, in context, industry analysis, strategic analysis, stakeholder analysis, with relationships, 360 assessments, leadership assessments, and so on. But it is especially related to organization. You simply can't get organized without analysis, especially in a medium or large company. Good analysis provides a language for organizing. It allows people to share an understanding of what is driving their efforts. It provides measures for performance. And organizational structure itself is fundamentally analytic. It is a means of decomposition to establish the division of labor. Just look at any organization chart with all that boxes neatly lined up. Picture the modern manager in an office, in some tall building, looking down on the grid of the city below and across at the offices of companies in other buildings. From this perspective, the manager does not see individual people so much as systems of organization, power, and communication. Turning around, that manager is surrounded by the plush paraphernalia of his or her own company, the fruits of many people tireless work on structures and systems and techniques. All of these represent analysis in the conventional sense, order and decomposition. How is such a manager to escape the analytic mindset? We prefer some different questions. How is a manager to get truly inside the analytic mindset, beyond the superficialities of obvious analysis, into the essential meanings of structure and systems? The key to analyzing effectively, in our view, is to get beyond conventional approaches in order to appreciate how analysis works and what effect it has on the organization. Consider three related tasks: one simple, one complicated, one complex. Building a pleasure boat can be relatively straightforward. It's about such things as the ratio of displacement to length. Building an aircraft carrier is far more complicated, involving the coordination of all kinds of subsystems and supply networks. Yet even here, the component parts can be readily understood and the necessary behaviors made rather predictable. But a decision on whether or not to deploy that aircraft carrier can be truly complex. Who is to say with any certainty what is the right thing to do, or even what is the best thing under the circumstances? Making that kind of complex decision means standing above shallow analysis, an easy technique, just running the numbers, and going deeper into the analytic mindset. You have to take into account soft data, including the values underlying such choices. Deep analysis does not seek to simplify complex decisions, but to sustain that complexity while maintaining the organization's capacity to take some action. That was a great power of Winston Churchill's rhetoric during World War II. His simple expressions captured the complexity that was Great Britain and the war in which it was engaged. We have come across examples of deep analysis for managers participating in our own coaching programs who were being forced into obvious decisions by shallow analysis. Close the plant. Speed up slow project. After studying the analytic mindset during our second module of our coaching program, they went back to their jobs and probed more deeply. They analyzed the analysis of others, where these people were coming from, what data and assumptions they were using. They dug out other sorts of information that didn't make it into the conventional analysis and found limitations in the techniques used. Most important, they recognized biases in their own thinking. As a result, they saw things differently, encourage others to change course, and help resolve problems. Was this analysis or reflection? I think it was reflective analysis. The problem for any manager, or for many managers today, as well as the business schools that train them, is not a lack of analysis, but too much of it. At least, too much conventional analysis. This is exemplified by that popular metaphor in finances of the tennis player who watches the scoreboard while missing the ball, much like the marketer who studies the crowd while missing the sale. The trick in the analytic mindset is to appreciate scores and crowds while watching the ball. Let's move on with managing context. The worldly mindset. So, manager, how are you doing? What are you thinking of the mindsets we have just reviewed? Please try to stop a little bit and reflect and write down your analysis. Not too shallow, not too deep. You have to see the market, but also don't miss the sale. The worldly mindset. We live on this globe that from a distance looks pretty uniform. Globalization sees the world from a distance, assuming and encouraging a certain homogeneity of behavior. Is that what we want from our managers? A closer look reveals something rather different. Far from being uniform, this world is made up of all kinds of worlds. Should we not then be encouraging our managers to be more worldly, more experienced in life, in both sophisticated and practical ways? In other words, should we not be getting into worlds beyond our own, into other people's circumstances, habits, cultures, so that we can better know our own world? To paraphrase the famous T.S. Eliot, should we not explore Sicily in order to return home and know the place for the first time? That to us is the worldly mindset. Being worldly does not require global coverage, just as global coverage does not a worldly mindset make. Indeed, global coverage does not even ensure a global perspective, given that the managers of so many global or multinational companies are rooted in the culture of the headquarters country. But there are companies that seem to be reasonably global as well as worldly. A Shell, perhaps. Shell has, of course, long covered the globe, but because of social pressures, including a headquarters that has always had to work across two cultures, Dutch and British, it has struck us in personal contracts as rather worldly. By this we mean that the company tailors and blends its parts across the world, socially and environmentally as well as economically. It must find and extract oil without violating the rights of the people under whose territories the oil sits, and it has to refine and sell that oil in ways that are respectful of the local environment. That may seem clear enough today, but think about what companies like Shell went through to get there. So let's stop. Be global, managers are told, and be local. Change and maintain order. How is anyone supposed to reconcile all this? The fact is that no manager can. We conclude from this that while global managers may spend a lot of time in the air, and not just literally, they become worldly when their feet are planted firmly on the ground of experience. That means getting out of their offices, beyond the towers, to spend time where products are produced, customers served, and environments threatened. Remember our subject manager from the hospital who tried to change all this. He went out of his office to talk to nurses, patients, doctors, operational staff in order to get sense of what was really happening, to have a glo- global and worldly mindset of all the organization and all of its business units in order for him to really try to make a change. He used change management in this, but first he used also an analytical mindset. Of course, shifting from a global to a worldly perspective is not easy. In Jay's clever novel Shogun, a Japanese woman tells her British lover, who is perplexed by the changed world of 17th century Japan, into which he has fallen. It's all so simple, and Jin-san, just change your concept of the world. Just. But maybe it's not quite as hard as it seems. One way to begin is through immersion in strange contexts. Get into someone else's world as a mirror to your own. That is why we hold our coaching program on the worldly mindset in different locations. For example, in India, for all but the Indian managers, India is not just another world, but in a sense, otherworldly. Being there, especially among fellow managers from Indian companies, takes the non Indian participants past the nice abstractions of economic, political, and social differences, down into the streets, where these differences came to action and alive. How can you possibly drive in this traffic? An American marketing manager from Lufthansa, shaken up during her ride from the airport, asked an Indian professor. He replied, I just joined the flow. Learning can begin. That is not chaos on the streets of India, but another kind of logic. When you realize it, you have become that much more worldly. And this is a topic about focus, working in a flow, to leave all distractions behind and just go for it, work it, analyze, be worldly, be reflective, talk to people, and start to learn your business units or organizations. We ask the participants in our program, after they go back to work between sessions, to write reflection papers on what they've learned at the models. After that Indian model, a Russian manager from the Red Cross, with his own share of third world experiences, wrote about seeing a pile of tires with a huge black cross on it. Black Cross, the clinic for tires, read the sign. He was struck by a symbol so familiar to him, used in such a radical different context. He wrote, once India has reminded me how interdependent, similar, and different at the same time are our worlds. This is the worldly mindset in action, seeing differently out to reflect differently in. We might say that a worldly mindset puts the reflective one into context. In our view, to manage context is to manage on the edges between the organization and the various worlds that surround it. Culture, industries, companies. What Ray Raphael has written about edges in his book by that title is germane to every manager. Many of the most interesting things, say the biologist, happen on the edges, on the interface between the woods and the field, the land and the sea. There, living organisms encounter dynamic conditions that give rise to untold variety. Variety, perhaps, but there is tension as well. The flora of the meadows, for example, as they approach the woodlands, find themselves coping with increasingly unfavorable conditions. The sunlight they need might be lacking, and the soil no longer feels right. There is also the problem of competition with alien species of trees and shrubs. The edges in short night abound with life, but each living form must fight for its own. No wonder managers must be worldly. They have to mediate those white zones where organization meets context and edges, not just, for example, customers acting in markets, however differentiated, but all those particular people in particular places, buying and using products in their own particular ways. Said this, pause a little bit. What do you think about the worldly mindset? Let's move on with managing relationships, the collaborative mindset. The collaborative mindset. It need hardly be said that managing is about working with people, not just as bosses and subordinates, but more important as colleagues and partners and peers. Yet, despite all the rhetoric about collaboration, in the West at least, we often take a narrow view. Thanks to the influence of economic theory, we see people as independent actors, detachable human resources or assets that can be moved around from place to place in our business units or organizations. Bought and sold, combined, downsized. That is not a collaborative mindset. If you picture yourself on top of a network, looking down on it, then you are out of it. How can you possibly manage its relationships that way? That said, in fact, our own original definition of the collaborative mindset got a jolt when our Japanese colleagues began to design the program's fourth module. It had been called Managing People, but they pointed out that a truly collaborative mindset does not involve managing people so much as the relationships among people. In teams and projects, as well as across divisions and alliances, getting into a truly collaborative mindset means getting beyond empowerment, a word implying that the people who know the work best must somehow receive the blessing of their managers to do it, and into commitment. It also means getting away from the current popular heroic style of managing and moving toward a more engaging style. Engaging managers listen more than they talk. They get out of their offices to see and feel more that they remain into them to sit and figure. By being worldly themselves, they foster collaboration among others, and they do less controlling, thus allowing other people to be in greater control of their own work. If I deem so that you do, is the implicit motto of the heroic manager, that for the engaging manager it is. We dream, so that we do. Our Japanese colleagues call this leadership in the background. It lets as many ordinary people as possible to lead. For a comparison of heroic and engaging management, let's read or investigate two ways to manage. When John P. Cotter was asked if the members of the Harvard Business School class whose careers he followed in his book The New Rules were team players, he replied, I think it's fair to say that these people want to create a team and lead it to some glory as opposed to being a member of a team that's being driven by somebody else. That is not the collaborative mindset. Having to run the team may be necessary at times, although we suspect it's needed far less often than most people think. But it hardly represents a collaborative point of view, nor does it foster teamwork. Leaders don't do most of the things that the organizations get done. They do not even make them get done. Rather, they help to establish the structures, conditions, and attitudes through which things get done. And that requires a collaborative mindset. We talk a great deal about networks these days, as well as teams, task forces, alliances, and knowledge work. Yet we still picture managers on top. Well, then picture yourself on top of a network, looking down on it. That puts you out of it. You can even see it. How can you possibly manage it? Manage its relationships. To be in a collaborative mindset means to be inside, involved, to manage throughout, not to micromanage, or to manage relationships. But it has a more profound meaning. Two, to get management beyond managers, to distribute it so that it responsibly flows naturally. Remember flow? To whoever can take the initiative and pull things together. Think of self-managing teams, of skunk works. Indeed, think of who manages the World Wide Web. Let's continue with managing change. And this is one of the most important mindsets because it is the essence of every manager or almost every manager. Imagine your organization as a chariot pulled by wild horses. That may be easy for you to do. These horses represent the emotions, aspirations, and motives of all the people in the organization. Holding a steady course requires just as much skill as steering around to a new direction. Philosophers from Plato to Vivekananda have used this metaphor to describe the need to harness emotional energy. It works well for management too. An action mindset, especially at senior levels, is not about whipping the horses into a frenzy, kerning Heather and John. It is about developing a sensitive awareness of the terrain and of what the team is capable of doing in and thereby helping to set and maintain direction, coaxing everyone around and along. Action, and especially change, need no introduction. Of course, everybody today understands them and the need for them. That's a problem. There is now an overwhelming emphasis on action at the expense of reflection. The Red Cross Federation is unusual, not in experiencing this problem, but in being aware of it. In addition, people are obsessed with change these days. We are told relentlessly that we live in times of great change, upheaval, that everything is changing. So we had better be in a constant state of alert, change or else. But this manages our focus, our flow, our work. Well, then look around. What do you see that has changed recently? Your clothing, your car, the airplane? That technology is newer. The first commercial jet aircraft took flight in 1952. Your smartphone? That changed about 10 years ago. Unless, of course, you are not using some type of pretty advanced communications. But I don't think so. I think you are using a regular smartphone. Our point is not that nothing is changing. No, something is always changing. Right now it is information technology. But many other things are not changing at all. And these we do not notice, like cars, like clothing. We tend to focus on what is changing and conclude that everything is. That is hardly a reflective mindset, and it is detrimental as well to the action mindset. We have to sober up to the reality that change is not pervasive and the phenomenon of change is not new. If the reflective mindset has to respect history, then the action mindset could use a little humility and respect flow and some things as they are. Change has no meaning with continuity. There is a name for everything changing all the time, and that is anarchy. No one wants to live with that. Certainly, no organization that wishes to survive. Businesses are judged by the products they sell and the services they render, not the changes they make. So change cannot be managed without continuity. Accordingly, the trick in the action mindset is to mobilize energy around those things that need change, while being careful to maintain the rest. And make no mistake about it, managing continuity is no easier than managing change. Remember all those wild horses. The dominant view of managing change is Cartesian. Action results from deliberate strategies, carefully planned, that unfold as systematically managed sequences of decisions. That is the analytic mindset, not the action one. Monsanto went into genetically engineered agriculture with that approach, with its strategy all worked out in advance. With control of seed varieties and certain pesticides and fertilizers, it could bring an entire ecosystem to the market, and it had the research capacity and presence worldwide to do it. So he set about a series of brilliantly conceived acquisitions and effectively positioned the company to be some type of Macintosh or Microsoft of the agro business. But the farmers and consumers weren't there. They were more enthusiastic about continuity at that point, and their plan collapsed. Change, to be successful, cannot follow some mechanistic schedule of steps, of formulation followed by implementation. Action and reflection have to be very analyzed. Have to blend in a natural flow, and that has to include collaboration. Satish Kumar, the director of Schumacher Institute in the United Kingdom, put it nicely in the title of his latest book, You Are Therefore I Am, a declaration of dependence. We had better to reflectively collaborative, as well as analytically worldly, if we wish to accomplish effective change. This is why also change management is very important. In order to effectively promote change, we need to manage it accordingly, using all the various mindsets that we are presenting in today's newsletter. Of course, energized action is necessary too, but that doesn't mean being hyperactive or fiddling around endlessly with structure. It means remaining curious, alert, experimental, visual. Changing is a learning process, and so is maintaining a course. We may think of ecstasis as the norm and change as driving, but it doesn't have to be that way. Active members of an organization may resist change imposed on them because they understand that the change would be dysfunctional, and they in turn may engage in silent change of their own, continually recreating operations for better performance. So, said this, what do you think of the action mindset? Do you think it's part of your personality? Do you think it is something you want to develop? Discuss a little bit and write it down in your notes. Weaving the mindsets together. Said all about managerial mindsets do not represent hard and fast categories. We need distinct labels for them, but they obviously overlap, and they are more than mere words. They are more than metaphors too, but a metaphor can help us understand how they come together. Imagine the mindsets as threads, and the manager as a weaver. Effective performance means weaving each mindset over and under the others to create a fine, sturdy cloth. You analyze, you act, but that does not work as expected. So you reflect. You act some more, then find yourself blocked. Realize that you cannot do it alone. You have to collaborate. But in order to collaborate, you have to get into the world of others. Then more analysis follows to articulate the new insights. And that is some important part of a manager to visualize, find, integrate insights in order for your business unit, your team, or your organization to be more productive. So you can act again, and so it goes, as a cloth of your effort forms. But one piece of cloth is not enough. An organization is a collective entity that achieves common purpose when the clothes of its various managers are sewn together into useful garments. When the organization managers collaborate to combine their reflective actions in analytic, worldly ways. We have been emphasizing the need for all managers to get deeply into all five mindsets, but many managers naturally tilt to one or to another, depending on their situations and personality inclinations. Some people are more reflective than others, some more action oriented, some more analytic, and so on. For example, finance and marketing have their share of calculating managers. Lots of analysis, reports, Excels. Salespeople can sometimes be little too worldly. People from HR are a little too enthusiastic about collaboration. So the weaving often has to be collaborative too. Like the sewing, as managers come to understand one another and combine their strengths. Companies have been quite concerned about seamlessness in recent years. Yet we all appreciate themes that are nicely shown, just as we appreciate mindsets that are nicely combined. Effective organizations, business units, and teams tailor handsome results out of their woven mindsets of their managers. So, manager, what do you think of these five mindsets? What managerial mindset most think or define you? Do you think you can make some weaving of those mindsets in your organization or business unit? Please try to reflect. I have a little task for you. Try to develop a, let's say, phrase or paragraph which encompasses the five mindsets that matches with your current business unit or organization. This has to be a new insight, something that you have seen, you want to analyze, you want to reflect, you want to act upon it, you want to reward the good results or change. This insight has to have the five mindsets of the manager with a rewardable aspect. If that insight is reached by one of your managers in your business unit, you have to reward it and also share it in order for other managers in your organization can have a good use of it and learn about it and create their own insights for their business unit or organization. So, said this, let's put up the work. Thank you for listening. This was Victor Marromo, your strategic planning and performance management coach. Please, I invite you to contact me with questions about strategic planning, change management, or the five mindsets of the manager. I will be pretty happy to help you. Remember, this newsletter gets out every Monday evening, so you can hear it, read it, reflect upon it, make your own insights, and share with your colleagues or peers. Said this, please have a nice week and see you very soon in our next newsletter. Goodbye.